Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk, your home for all the latest and greatest on the New York Jets. Make sure to give us a like, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our latest New York Jets content. And if you want to make sure your questions are read tonight, use that super chat feature in fans. You're going to want to use it tonight because we have a special guest. We have Dom C from DC_NY Jets here, who was in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, and he has all of the great details. Go check him out on Twitter. He has great resources throughout the offseason, including a Jets interview tracker. He's already started that for the 2025 draft season. So there's a lot of great stuff on his channel. So go check him out. Give him a like and subscribe. All the links are included in the video below. Dom, good to see you. How you doing? And how was Mobile?
Oh, glad to be back, man. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, Mobile is great, man. It always is. It's a fun time. It's a lot of work. It's tiring, but it's always very rewarding. I mean, to say the absolute least, it's always very rewarding. So.
Well, I think the other thing too, it's growing in popularity, and I think it's a very important step of the process because of all the major key mark events. We talk about the combine, we talk about the pro workouts. I think this is probably the best barometer outside of studying game film because you have competition, you have guys going full speed, you have guys in full pads, and really the Senior Bowl is a good starting point to see what prospects are going to be trending the right direction and what prospects could be trending the wrong direction. I guess one of my first questions is like when you first got there, was there a player that you were really excited to see that maybe you left going, maybe I have more questions than answers about him as I leave the Senior Bowl this year?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a bunch of them, but somebody for me that hits that mark is Wyatt Milam, the offensive lineman out of West Virginia. Before I get into Milam and my reasons why, I do want to say I think you make an important point. Excuse me. The Senior Bowl is the mecca of the draft season. It really kicks it off. It's really the kickoff event for the draft cycle. Even though the draft cycle starts in the fall when these games are going on. For the real meat and potatoes really starts in Mobile. The reality is that the real work on the prospects and the evaluation happened way before Mobile. I use Mobile and to really gauge if what I was seeing from a prospect is accurate, live and center, or if it's not, it gives me a marker to go back and see what I missed or what I wasn't adding to it. So I think that's the biggest barometer for me and the biggest plus of being boots on the ground, eyes on the player, so on and so forth. The rest of the stuff that I do, on behalf of the Talking Jets Network, where I am the draft analyst there, is all gravy. It's really solidifying my evaluations on these guys. So getting back to Wyatt Milam and talking about evaluations, you look at his film. He graded out as a first round player for me. Not many this year for me. I think 13 total. But he was one of them. I mean, his film is spectacular. His film is clean. He checks every box that you want out of an offensive lineman. In terms of positional flexibility. He's played on the left and the right. At tackle, you talk about the strength, the hand usage, the technical savvy that he employs in both the run and the pass. He didn't let up a sack for 2 years. He's only let up 6 pressures in his entire collegiate career, over 3,000 snaps. So I was really stoked to see him. And listen, and I had a chance to sit down with him for about 10, 15 minutes or so, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy, and I wish him all the best. However, if I'm being honest, he played just interior. He played guard and center during the Senior Bowl by his choice. He wanted to show more, that his positional flexibility, and he struggled. So he was a guy that I was very high on that struggled a little bit. He had his moments, but he had a lot of down moments as well. And I get it. He's a young kid, never played inside before, at least at this level versus the best of the best. So I'm not surprised. That a player would, kind of hit some road bumps along that way. But I was surprised it was him, if that makes any sense, because I thought his film was so clean. I thought he was one of those guys that could just, get up and do anything. And that's where it stands.
Right. And it does make a lot of sense. And one of the great things I love about your content is you interviewed a lot of the prospects on your
Yeah,
Twitter page. So guys, go check that out. You're not going to want to miss any of those interviews. But I think for me, you brought up a good point. Like, yes, this is a lot of the film process, and for the draft, the scouting has already been done. But I do think that one of the interesting aspects of the Senior Bowl, which really helps in the process, is when we talk about some of these smaller school
yeah,
prospects.
yeah.
Like a Mike Green, for example, I think is a good example where it's like, okay, I see the talent, I see him dominating at this level, but it's also what many would consider a lesser level of college football. How's he going to do against some of the grade A prospects, some of the better, bigger prospects? And guys like him, I thought really had great showings. And I think it's a good barometer, especially with some of these small schools guys.
Yeah.
Okay, they can hang with the big boys. And there's always that, but it's like, well, the film was absolutely great. He's dominating this level. It's what you want to see. But is it because of the competition they're facing, or are they really that good? And I think that's probably the best thing about the Senior Bowl is seeing these smaller school guys who really kind of don't get the chance to play big time competition, really get a chance to shine in Mobile.
Yo, absolutely. And Jim Nagy, who's the the executive president, he's the big boss of the Senior Bowl. He does a good job. Him and his scouting team really do a good job scouring all aspects of football. Like there's been Division 3 guys there. There's been Division 2 guys there. This year, two of the better guys. I mean, arguably the best. If you talk to 10 guys, you might get a couple different variant answers, but I'd say the majority of people will say the same thing that I believe is that probably the single best player there all week came from an FCS school, North Dakota State, and Gray Zabel. He came in and he dominated at all 5 offensive line positions, was a tackle only at small North Dakota State, FCS, not even big Division 1 football. And he was dominant in every aspect. I mean, there's a handful, if that, a handful of reps between the week's practice and the game that really you could say that he lost. So kudos on him. Jackson Slater, another guy that from Sacramento State. He was at the Hula Bowl and excelled there, and he was a late add-on, and he held his own, man. It's great to see. So yeah, when those guys show up and then really show up, it does wonders for them, and it does wonders to really set the benchmark that there's NFL players all throughout the country, not just in the SEC or the Big Ten or so on and so forth.
And if you guys are joining us now, we're talking with Dom C, breaking down the Senior Bowl, especially prospects for the New York Jets. If you have any questions or prospects and you want to make sure Dom and us see your questions, make sure to use that super chat feature. And of course, comment below. We will get to your questions in a little bit. Going off of the Senior Bowl too, I guess one thing I have to ask, because did you get a chance to talk to Jim Nagy? And if you did you happen to talk about, I don't know, the Jets general manager interview that he had, or was that did they play that a little close? Play that close to the vest?
No, fair question. I wish I wish I did had a chance to get with him face to face there. We've chatted offline before, a little bit back and forth this year on just random stuff, nothing, too crazy, too specific. But he's there, and his time is taken up by the major media, the NFL Network and of the world, and CBS and ESPN and Pelissero and all those guys, on top of really being that conduit between the front offices and the players. You know what I mean? So no, I didn't get a chance. I wish I would have, though. I would have liked to shake his hand today or this week. It was a great experience.
Yeah, pull him in. What did you tell Woody Johnson? Were Woody's sons in the interview when you were there? So I think a lot of Jet fans would have loved to be a fly on the wall. But let's get back to the prospects. And I mean, it feels like we go through this every few years as Jet fans, but we have to talk about one position, and that's the quarterback position. Again, we don't know. It's still very early in the process. We don't know if a certain 41-year-old quarterback might be coming back next year, but let's play the hypothetical that he's no longer with the Jets. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of buzz, and I think you've already seen it start with the quarterbacks, good and bad, at the Senior Bowl. We see people really talking up Jackson Dart. We see people concerned about Jalen Milroe, especially after his measurements. What would you say about these quarterbacks? Because there's also been the comment, you've done this for a long time. And my opinion is I think that there's some talent in this quarterback class,
Sure.
but it doesn't feel like this is a quarterback class like last year. A lot of guys you could see, okay, they're going to be a franchise quarterback potentially. It seems like a lot of guys that they have some nice tools in the toolbox, but it's going to take a lot of work and patience to really develop some of these guys. What are your initial thoughts, I guess, on the quarterback class in general, but also specifically the two big prospects that we saw down in Mobile this week?
So I think it's fair to say that it's not the strongest class, top to bottom, as years and last year was probably one of those anomalies. You're not going to find a class that rich and that deep at the top, and that's just not even at the quarterback position. We can look back in 4 or 5 years, which is a real good aiming point to gauge how a class progressed and how a class turned out. And you're going to see that I'd say a good, I wouldn't be shocked if you found 90% of those guys in the first round, not just quarterbacks, but all the players were hits. It was just a really, really kind of outlier of a class, very deep. This quarterback class is nothing in the in that realm. There's still going to be quarterbacks that go in the first round because because of the position, the scarcity and the value of the position. Those guys just get pushed up the board. Of the 18 to 19 guys that I've graded out, I have 1 first round grade. I have 2 second round grades, and the rest of them are all day 3s. And that's just me. Everyone's going to be different. Of the 2 guys that were there, like going into it, and when I started really reviewing last year's film during the summer, I was a big fan of Jalen Milroe, and I'm still a big fan of Jalen Milroe. I don't want to say that, but you didn't really see through the 2024 collegiate football season. You didn't really see the progression that you hope to see in terms of playing quarterback. You saw outstanding traits. You saw probably top 5 in the NFL already level athleticism that he offers. But there's still issues. There's still processing issues. There's still issues with accuracy, and I think a lot of it, the majority of it, falls on mechanical issues that he has. He's just because of what he's doing or how he's working inside of his between his ears. He's just late on a little things, and when he gets late, he rushes and throws off the back foot. Wonderful arm. He's got a very strong arm. It's not the most accurate, and I think a lot of that stuff is fixable. The question is we've seen this we've seen this game play out before. Super athletic, not really a pro style or NFL quarterback yet. Some of them work out well. There was a lot of the same discussions about Lamar Jackson. Could he really play the quarterback position? Although I thought Lamar Jackson had a 3 or 4 tier level better collegiate career than Jalen Milroe did. But there was questions about that. Then the Anthony Richardson comparisons. We saw it with Jamarcus Russell. You can sub in any true dual threat quarterback that you can. So it's not there. He's not a guy that's ready to play in the NFL right now. Do I still think there's a chance he goes in the first round? I do. Although he's not a first round grade on me, somebody's going to fall in love with those traits. He's going to go to the combine. He's going to, if he tests in the top 5%, percentile in some of those athletic drills, especially with his legs, I think somebody's going to, be stubborn enough that either they can fix him and he's going to be their franchise, or they're going to draft him early. They're going to park his butt there and break him down and develop him. Very similar to what Green Bay did with Jordan Love when he came out of Nevada. Jordan Love had a wonderful arm. Jordan Love was uber athletic. Jordan Love really needed to be broken down, his mechanics from the ground back up. And it took 3 years for him to really settle in and become a quarterback. And look, now he's a $50 million a year quarterback. So it can happen. It has to be kind of like that perfect blend of coaching and opportunity that will make Jalen Milroe get to that next level.
Right. And I think with a lot of these quarterbacks, you a perfect world, they need to sit. They need to develop. And I think we're seeing, especially guys now, the second, third time around the league, like Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, when they actually have had time to develop, they've actually turned out to be good quarterbacks. And
Correct.
the only issue you worry about is the one thing I do think with the Jets is I do think they would be patient if they drafted a quarterback. It's just tough because I don't see someone I love at 7, even if they traded back a couple spots. I don't love anyone really in that first round range. And unfortunately, round 2, I think, is out of the question because the way the NFL works now, if you love a quarterback, even if you have like a second round grade on the guy, you're going in the first round to get him because it's worth giving up that extra pick or two just to get that 5th-year option if you hit on the guy and not running into a situation where you have to pay them a year early. So I guess one of the hot names around the Jet fandom right now is Jackson Dart. Again, I think he had a nice showing in the game.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking a little bit before about the show, a little bit inconsistent throughout the week. Is he someone in this process? Because we kind of know who the top 2 quarterbacks in this draft are. I think the big question now is who's going to enter that third quarterback territory. And I think a lot of people are pushing Jackson Dart into maybe being the third quarterback selected in this draft. I would love to know your thoughts on him. And between the two, I think Milroe's got the higher ceiling in terms of the athleticism. But do you think Dart might be a safer play for teams that aren't confident that they can develop Milroe as a quarterback?
Yeah, so I agree with your point that it seems that the agents and the media and the vibe, the buzz right now is Jackson Dart will be the third quarterback in the class taken. Similar to Milroe, Jackson Dart. I'll say this. Jackson Dart has some real fundamental issues, especially with his lower body that will need to get fixed. But I think that Jackson Dart has an NFL arm. I think he has really good pocket presence. I think he has sneaky mobility. He's not the dual threat athlete that Jalen Milroe is. But he can still hurt you with his legs. Very similar, and I'm not comping the player and their skill sets overall, but the athletic piece, the running piece is very similar to me, like Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones never looked like a guy that could hurt your legs, but you would look back and after a game, he would get 60, 70 yards sometimes on the ground, sometimes 100 yards. So he's athletic enough to do that kind of stuff. The way I see it go, I don't know how I'm going to see it, how I see it going. It's way too early to tell, but I think Jackson Dart has a little bit higher of a floor, right? He might not have Milroe. If we're comparing the two, Milroe might have the higher ceiling, but it's going to need the perfect storm to happen for him to reach that. Whereas Jackson Dart, I think can get there. I think if Jackson Dart, gets in the right system with the right quarterback coach, and I'll use. I'm not suggesting this, but I'll use an example. Say Jackson Dart lands with the Rams, and he sits and learns behind Matthew Stafford for a couple years. He works under Sean McVay, who's arguably the best offensive mind in the NFL. I think they might be able. You might get a good starter out of Jackson Dart. But the variance on guys like that putting it all together is so small that it's still such a shot. I reckon that Dart will go. Both Dart and Milroe will possibly go in the first. They'll definitely be off the board by the top 40, 50 picks. So
I think the hard part with this draft, and we'll get to the other prospects, and I think we talked a lot about the quarterbacks. I have one more quarterback question, but
sure.
I think the hard part is you look at the top 10 and how many of those teams you can make the argument can make a quarterback. I think we're going to see a lot of quarterbacks overdrafted in this draft, like a lot. But if you were the Jets, like let's play a little game. Like let's imagine a little crystal ball right here. If you had the 7th pick, and we know the Jets are going to need to take a quarterback eventually. Do you think it would be a smarter decision to try to trade back and get assets for next year's draft and try to go into next year's quarterback class next year? Because it does feel like a lot of people are saying next year's class should be a better quarterback class. Like, if you were the Jets, is that something you would really consider after looking through all these quarterback films? It's still early in the process in terms of the whole process, but if you're, and again, who knows how much they've done? It's a whole new regime, it's a whole new GM, it's a whole new coach, which also I think also makes sense to maybe punt the can down another year as
Yeah.
well. But if you were had a general manager cap on,
Mhm.
would you say, if I need a quarterback, am I better reaching in this draft or trying to get assets and taking a shot in next year's 2026 draft class?
I think all 32 teams would vote for the latter. If all 32 teams
Mhm.
needed a quarterback, they'd all lean towards the latter option there.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is not a quarterback class that a lot of NFL teams are going to go gaga for. Although two of them will probably still be off the board in the top 10 picks. I think there's a lot of I think there's going to be a lot of teams, especially the teams that are quarterback needy, and the Jets fall in there. The Raiders fall in there. Tennessee falls in there. The Giants. I mean, there's the Saints. There's tons of teams that, even though they might have a quarterback here, they're going to be in the quarterback market sooner rather than later. Whether it's this year or next. So I think if given the option, all of those teams would rather trade back and acquire assets to try to move back up when the class, is suspected to be a little bit more robust at the quarterback position.
All right, guys, if you're just joining us, we have Dom C here. Now, guys, make sure to give us a like and subscribe so we can get this out to more Jet fans. And, of course, follow Dom. All of his stuff is in the channel description. But again, guys, if you want to make sure that your question is read, make sure to use the super chat feature so you are guaranteed a spot to get your question answered. But let's get to our first question tonight. It is going to be from Rico the Pup. He's asking, have either of you taken a look at Anthony Belton, the right tackle from NC State? All the physical measurements and experience. I think he did well at the Senior Bowl, potential day 2 guy. Personally, I'm someone that also is looking at the Jets' offensive line, maybe not with the first pick, but day 2 could be arranged. Now, a lot of the media around the event was saying the offensive line was a little bit disappointing, or they felt a lot of the tackles struggled in this, but this is also really deep defensive tackle. So I think this is a two-tier question. We'll ask specifically about Belton, but was the offensive line struggle? Is it because this isn't a great offensive line group that was in Mobile, or is it just because that's just how deep and talented this defensive line that came to Mobile was this year?
It's a tough question to answer. I don't think that the tackle class as a whole really struggled, although comparatively, again, it's apples and oranges, the class this year to the class last year. Comparatively, there's no one, that you could say, and whoever you can ask a bunch of different evaluators, and they'll have different answers for you. But whoever the top tackle is on your board this year probably wouldn't be within the top 7 tackles last year. So it's really apples to oranges. I don't know if they all struggled. I mean, listen, Josh Connolly from Oregon, he was rock solid, minus the one viral rep that Mike Green went through his chest. Anthony Belton, who Rico talks about here, he had a really good week. I thought there was other guys that, I really, we talked about Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, arguably the best player overall, not even just on the offensive line, arguably the best player overall all week. So there were guys that stood out. Speaking about Belton, I got a day 3 grade on him, and he's one of the guys that, like I talked about earlier, that I have earmarked to go back and rewatch his film, because some of the stuff that he showed on tape, at the Senior Bowl and in the one-on-ones, really was an improvement of some of the stuff that I saw in college. I have him bookmarked in my evaluations as an interior guy. I didn't think he was going to be able to handle the outside. He's a little bit big, a little bit clunky with his footwork. But the power was there. And, maybe you have a guy that, like I said, in the lines, again, not a pro comp, so don't take it that way, but in the lines of Mekhi Becton, right? Where, he starts.
You just gave so many Jet fans like Vietnam PST flashbacks, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I think that, you find a guy that, you think maybe struggled. Bigger guys usually have a tendency to be a little bit obviously bigger guys tend to be a little bit slower at times. That's just the reality. And if you're slower, you might not hit those 45 or those vertical sets a lot, so you might struggle with some speed around the edge. So I thought the power profile that Anthony Belton showed would play better inside. But he had a really good week, and he had a really good week down in Mobile, and I think there's going to be a lot of teams that see him as a guy that can stick a tackle. Now, if he stays there his whole career, I don't know. That's still yet to be determined. But he's a guy that I have earmarked to go back and rewatch based on his production and his overall, really plus play down in Mobile.
Well, one interesting thing about the Senior Bowl was one prospect that I have an eye on, sticking with the offensive line. This is a little bit, and guys, I'll get to your questions. I'm just being a little selfish because I just have to be a little selfish from time to time. But Chase Lunt, the tackle from UConn, I know he was invited to the Senior Bowl. Was he there? Because I didn't see much buzz about him. I don't know if he's injured. I don't know if he just didn't attend the Senior Bowl. And what are your thoughts on him?
So I like Chase a lot. He's in the he falls somewhere in my top 10 for tackles. He's a guy that I think can stay at tackle. And that's the thing with this class. You can tell, like, you go back to, let's think about last year, Nolan. You had guys that you knew that played tackle in college that you knew were coming in and going to play tackle in the pros.
Olu, you have just go down the list.
J.C. Latham. Fuanga, the kid that Pittsburgh took out of Washington, or Marius Mims. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? This year's class is very, very different. This year's class, you got a bunch of guys that were good tackles in college, but probably going to have to move inside for one reason or another, whether it's Wyatt Milam with, like sub 32 inch arms, whether it's, Ariante Ursary and or Kelvin Banks because of physical or flexibility issues and problems with speed on the outside. They might have to bump inside. There's guys that might start inside and eventually develop into good tackles, which happens as well. But there's very few guys that I think were tackles in college that are going to come in and be tackles in the pros out of this class. We were talking about, oh my God, I just drew a blank. Who the heck?
Chase Lunt.
Chase Lunt. Yeah. So he's a guy that I think can stay at the tackle. He's got the length. My guess, and this is there's no facts, there's no knowledge, inside knowledge behind this. My guess is that he probably needed to take the time and really get his weight and his strength up, because that's where I think was a big question mark for him. At 6'7.5", he was only, he was sub 310 pounds.
Yeah.
So he probably took the time to really work and get a little bit heavier in the ass, if you will, and build up some of that strength profile, which was, I know, which was going to be a big question for him as he transitioned from UConn to the pros. So again, there's no inside knowledge of that. That's my guess. But he was invited. He accepted his invite, and then in the last minute, he backed out. And it's probably at the advice of someone in his corner saying, "Hey, listen, just worry about getting stronger, worry about getting faster, worry about testing properly, and let your film, kind of play for itself."
Right. And for a guy like him, especially, you have Jim Mora as his head coach at UConn, who's been a professional coach. You're going to get, if you ask Jim Mora, he's going to give you the skinny on the kid. But I think the big thing with this whole process, too, is it's like picking and choosing. It reminds me a lot like the SATs. Like, what they don't tell you is you can skip questions on the SAT and it actually helps you. So I think, like, for certain prospects, and I think you bring up a great point with Lunt, where if he goes to Mobile and is undersized and they measure him and his weight's only 300 pounds or 295, then all of a sudden people are going to say, well, wait a minute, that's a red flag. It's like with Milroe, which we were talking about, having the sub 9-inch hands.
Yeah.
Like immediately that sends off alarm bells around everyone saying, "Oh, well, this might not be a good thing." But I want to also stick to, because there are some good questions here in the
Sure.
chat and some good prospects. And this is a good one from Carlos. Carlos is a longtime subscriber, and Carlos brings up a really good point, which is one of the things. I think two of the positions we feel there's a lot of depth is defensive line and tight end, especially coming out of Mobile.
Mhm.
And I've already seen a lot of mock drafts already saying the Jets might take like a Mason Graham or a tight end even at 7. And my thought process was, I get where they're thinking, but this is such a deep group, it seems, of tight end and especially of defensive line. Does it make more sense for the Jets to try to address that positions rounds 2 through 4? And do you think Elijah Arroyo would be there, or maybe is a trade late into the first round guy, or is this
Mhm.
someone that's just going to keep ascending? It could maybe even crack the top 20, especially when we get to the measurable stage of the process.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Arroyo in particular, like directly, and then I'll get to the question that Carlos asked here.
Yeah.
He was the best tight end in Mobile, like hands down. He made plays like left and right. Really showed nuance in his route running, and his quickness, at the top of his routes and at the stem. Showed good hands. He's from a tight end perspective, probably, a full tier or two better than anyone that was down there. And there was a lot of good ones. Now, to your point about the class, this is the deepest tight end class that I've seen in 14 years.
Wow.
Hands down, hands down. It's a deep class. I have, and I'll look real quick. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 8 guys that have a day 1 or day 2 grade.
Ooh.
So that, and then that doesn't necessarily take into account all the guys that'll go early day 3 in round 4.
Which is a
There's
great
no
segue to Scott's super chat question. He asked, "Is there a day 3 tight end?" And I think that's perfect, because you talked about the 8 guys you like day 1. Now, I'll let you finish like with some of that, but I want to make sure Scott got the love
Sure.
that he gets with the super chat. But is there a day 3 tight end that maybe it really piqued your interest, especially watching down there in Mobile?
There's a couple guys, absolutely. Terrence Ferguson, I thought, again, for as good as Arroyo was, Terrence Ferguson, the tight end out of Oregon, was a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a third or fourth option, kind of not really the priority at Oregon. So you look at his stats, the people who are stat hunters, and you see a guy who's ho hum, but I thought that he showed very well in every aspect. Not only receive like as a receiver, but he showed really, really good quickness. I thought he handled himself at 250 pounds, not the hugest guy, and he self-admittedly, he'll tell you that, he's a guy that, if he, wanted to really, if he needed to work and develop on something, it would be, really help really sustaining blocks and being more of a force in line as a run blocker. But he's smart. Like you could tell he's a student of the game. You can, just by watching him, you can tell in the reps, in the 11v11 reps, and even in the game, that, or at least in the, when they did game like situations of, 4-minute drill, 2-minute drill, so on and so forth. He's a willing blocker, and he understands angles. He might not bowl a guy. He might not put his shoulder pad into a defensive end's hip and displace him 3 yards off the ball, but he understands leverage. He understands how to utilize his body to wall off and help formulate running lanes. He's a guy that, I wasn't, not that I wasn't very high on, but I just thought he was, again, very ho-hum. But I think he has a chance to come into this league, similar, again, when I bring up pro comps, I'm not saying that this player is like this player, but think of the trajectory that Trey McBride took when he was taken in the second round for Arizona. He had a lot of juice and a lot of hype coming into that 2022 draft, but it took a couple years for him to get there, right? Tight end is a very, very difficult position to transition from the pros to the, from the college to the pros. So it takes some time. The guys like Brock Bowers, those are anomalies, man. Most of the guys, struggle at first and then kind of find their niche. And I think that's the path that I can see a guy like Terrence Ferguson going, where, year one might be an adjustment, maybe even year two, but, he's going to kind of come within his own. I think his athleticism and his all around skill set is something that the NFL is going to look for. So yeah, he's a guy that I would target day 3 for sure.
Right. And again, guys, if you want to make sure that your chat is seen, use the super chat feature to make sure that Dom gets your question. And look, I agree with you too, because the Jets might be in the market for 3 potentially tight ends, Tyler Conklin, free agent, Jeremy Ruckert. But you're right. If you look at the Lions too, that tight end room, you look at guys that are between 245, 255 pounds, but guys that are athletic, but more importantly, they're willing to stick their nose in the trenches. They're willing to get to the second level. They're willing to make blocks. And I think with a lot of tight ends, especially now in the college spread formation, it's kind of hard. You got to figure like, okay, are they just a receiving tight end that doesn't want to block, or are they someone that's willing to block? So I do think that having that versatility is very important. So speaking
And
of the
before you get into that, and just one more thing on the tight end, and that's the beauty of this class is you got every single type of tight end you can imagine, right? Like not even the guys down at Mobile, like you talk about like Tyler Warren, who is good, maybe not great at everything, but he's good at everything, whether he's in line, whether he's, slot, moved out as a power slot with the ball in his hands with his route running. He's above average in everything. And then you got the guys who Arroyo, Jake Bringenstall out of Clemson is another guy that comes to mind where they're more of your big slot types. Rondé Gadsden, somebody mentioned in the chat. Those are the guys that are going to be your true receiving threats, but might not be able to right off the bat, or if at all, really offer you much in the run game. Harold Fannin falls into that, that category as well. And then you got guys that are really good all around. Gunnar Helm out of Texas, one of my favorites in the entire class. He's the guy. If I'm, you said if I put my Jets GM hat on, he's a guy I'm targeting in the second round. I think he's got the ability that 5 years from now he might be the best tight end in this class.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really intriguing, especially too. And that's one of the reasons why I was a little surprised. Like some guys are mocking Tyler Warren to the Jets at 7. I'm like, this is such a deep class that you feel like you can get a difference maker. I mean, Sam Lepore is a great example with the Lions. Ironically enough, he was a 2nd round pick, and look at how he's developed into one of the top tight ends in the game. You can get good tight end talent day 2, even day 3, potentially the draft. You just have to know where to look. Going to the defensive line, because this was another polarizing issue for the Jets. And
sure,
luckily, this seems to be a good fix for this draft where you have a team that's looking to adjust the defensive line. It's also interesting, too, because the Jets are kind of going to seemingly a different scheme. Again, I think they're going to do a lot of 4-3 front still, but we do know that this is also a system they like to switch into a 3-4 attacking defense, blitzing from different levels. Are there certain defensive tackles that you see in this draft that could play the 5 technique, get outside on a couple in the 3-4 technique, but then kick inside on a 4-3? And like the tight ends, is this another position where maybe you don't take a Mason Graham at 7 because you can get a really good B+ player at this position in rounds 2 through 4?
Yeah, I would tell you this, similar to the tight end class, it's a very, very deep defensive line class, both at the edge position and at the defensive tackle position, which is why, people, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on my channel or, whether it's through the Talking Jets network, I've shared my opinions on the Jets, match with Mason Graham. And personally, it's not one that I'm looking to entertain. Again, and it's no disrespect or no knock on the player. He's a phenomenal player, but I think the value that you can get in rounds 2, 3, and 4 on the defense, especially at the defensive tackle position in this class, is something that I'm not willing to pass up, and it's probably not likely that the Jets are going to spend number 7 overall, number 40 overall, and maybe even a 4th rounder, number 104 overall on the defensive tackle, which you can, you're going to be able to get guys that are going to affect the game, right from the jump, right off the chain. These guys are going to come in, they're going to play. So yeah, there's a lot of deep tackles. There's a lot of versatility. A guy I've been talking about, and you can, you could fact check me on this. Go through my, my Twitter history. a small school kid. Well, not small school, Mac program, Toledo. Darius Alexander has been a guy that's been on my radar for a while. And we talked about Belton, like he was a guy that I earmarked that I wanted to go back and watch because he performed so well. And I didn't grade him, he didn't grade out as well as I saw him perform, with my own eyes. Darius Alexander was just that. I have a high second round grade. I've had a high second round grade on Darius Alexander, and he came in and he was one of the, the three best defensive players in all of Mobile this week. He's just so advanced with his hand usage, and not only the strength in it, but the way the way he counters and the way that he uses it to gain separation and get into the chest of the offensive lineman. And he does that from the nose tackle. He does it from the 3 tech. He did it from wide 9. He did it split out wide on 2 feet, rushing the passer like that at 320 pounds. The guy is just a really, really top echelon defensive player in this class. A guy that, this week opened a lot of eyes up to Darius Alexander, but the real ones knew, man. The real ones knew that he was a player. So he's a guy I think that has tons of versatility. He's not scheme specific. So if we ran a 3-4 or an odd man front, he could play on the 5 tech. He could play the 4-eye. If you ran a 4-man front, he could do everything right up and down the line. Is he the stoutest run defender? No, he's not. He's not like Vita Vea in there stopping the run, but he's good. He's just not elite, but he's elite in all the other traits. So I think he's a guy that is fits that bill of what you were talking about. I mean, there's tons of them, man. This defensive line class, especially down at Mobile, were so good. Shamar Stewart, I'm sure you heard the name. Edge rusher out of Texas A&M.
281 pounds. He's
285 pounds, and he moves like he's 235.
A
guy that big shouldn't be that fast. And he is. So he's a guy that can play, similar, again, not a comp, but similar to what the Jets did in with JFM, where he would play outside, in certain sets. He would rush from the inside in certain sets. He's got the body to do that. He's got the length. The get off is as good as any defensive lineman in this class. He's a guy that is going to soar up, come April. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he's a top 10 pick come April.
Yeah, like you were saying, I think the thing that stood out is the size of some of these players, but also the athleticism. Like Savion Jones from LSU was another one that really kind of jumped out to me. I mean, it was like you're looking at the listings and the size and you see it, but your mind sometimes is like, okay, guys that big shouldn't be able to have that step off, be able to have that swim move, be able to have that quick step to the inside, which was very impressive. And look, this is a very talented group, and I think that's exciting for your Jet fan. But with the Jets, too, I think that we have to also look at the back end, the back 7. And I want to start off with the linebackers because, let's face it, this could be a very transitional offseason for the Jets. You look at C.J. Mosley. Is he going to be back? Is he going to be playing? And as much as we love Jamie Sherwood, team MVP last year, you also have Jeff Ulbrich and you have Robert Saleh, and 2 new defenses who might give him a stupid contract and say, you know what, we're going to build the linebacking core around you. There could be a scenario after free agency the Jets need to get linebackers. So I guess the big question for me is I don't think the Jets are going to invest a day 1 or day 2 pick in a linebacker. But are there guys that you saw or that you feel on day 3 that could be a good fit or maybe replace the role of like a CJ Mosley? Because again, if they're going to play a lot more 3-4 fronts, they're going to really need to invest in this linebacking group or at least find a linebacker or 2 to work to develop.
Yeah, well, I will say this. Speaking of just Senior Bowl week at Mobile, there are certain positional groups which really aren't afforded the ability to stand out and shine. The running backs, because there's no real contact, right? So so during the practice, I mean, they're not tackling. There's contact. They go live at the line of scrimmage, and like even in the 11-on-11 drills where they're technically live, they're banging helmets and they're going hard at the line. But once the running back breaks through, it's no contact. There's no contact on quarterbacks, anything like that. So the linebackers are really at a disadvantage. I'd say the linebackers and the running backs are probably the two positions that are at a disadvantage because so much of their game is relying on, whether it's tackling from the defensive side or contact balance and breaking tackles for the running back. So it's really hard to gauge guys that will be good NFL linebackers in that format. But what you can see is how smart they are, if they're heady players, if they how good they move, their movement skills in space and so on and so forth. So there were a couple guys there. Bassa, the kid from Oregon, was really good. I thought Demetrius Knight Jr., linebacker, big guy out of South Carolina, for a guy his size, I thought he moved very well. Jack Kaiser from Notre Dame, he was also good. But the guy, forget about the Senior Bowl. The guy, and you said you don't think the Jets are going to take a linebacker in the first or the second round. I might beg to differ because I think there's off-ball linebacker, similar to safety and similar running back, are just positions that people don't want to spend early capital on. But there's a player in this class coming out, which I think is, again, not a player comp, but if you took if you took the run fit ability of CJ Mosley and the spatial and the sideline to sideline scrape, shed and scrape abilities of someone like Jamian Sherwood, the tackling of Jamian Sherwood, if you combine them together, you get Jahad Campbell, the linebacker who's coming out of Alabama. He'll be 21, just turning 21 at the draft. He's about 240 pounds. He moves like a gazelle. He plays so physical and fills the whole, plays good within the phone booth. A short tackler. He's a top 10 player for me. And off-ball linebackers usually don't get graded that high. He's in my top 10 overall in this class. If somehow the Jets, and I don't think it's going to happen, and we can talk about that a different topic. But if the Jets were to trade down into the mid-teens or late teens or something like that, I would be all on board for taking Jahad Campbell. Now, there's not many off-ball linebackers that go in the first round these days. It's just, like I said, it's a positional group. I don't know how much influence Aaron Glenn had on it, but one of the last ones was Detroit, where they invested in a middle linebacker on day one of the draft. So maybe, just maybe, but he's a guy I think that it's going to be there's not many guys in the class overall who I think are blue chip. I think there's one true elite talent, and that's Abdul Carter. Mm-hmm. But there's a couple of guys that I think are that if they continue at the if they reach their potential and continue an upward trend of what they showed in college, I think Jahad Campbell can be an all-pro player sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I also, to follow up, because you mentioned Abdul Carter, I don't see any scenario he gets to the Jets at 7. I know there's some people that are like mocking it. There's a world I could see him being the first pick in this draft, even too. I could see. I know it's tough with the quarterbacks and how much the quarterbacks are going to push it, but I could see a case. But I agree with you. The off-ball linebacker is a position that doesn't get enough appreciation, but you do have a head coach in Aaron Glenn that, again, we know he's going to be the CEO of this team, but he's going to build this defense. I really do think if he feels that that's the best player for this fit, they're going to do it. I mean, one of the most unpopular picks the Jets have made in the last decade was the Will McDonald pick. And now you look back at the 2 years later, and it looks like it's been a pretty good pick. At the time, it was a pick that everyone, I had to talk people off the ledge on this channel saying, guys, give the kid a chance. We have to see him actually get a chance. And year 2 of his pro career, he's already getting 10 plus sacks. So that was a good pick. And I guess the final position I want to focus on too, because this has been a position that, especially with the last regime, was either overlooked or it wasn't considered an investment. That was the safety group. Now, again, I don't think this is an incredibly deep safety graph. I don't think it's one of those groups where you look at it where there's a safety. I know there could potentially be 1 or 2 safeties taken day 1. I don't think there's a safety we're taking the top 10, but are there certain safeties that you could see maybe day 2, day 3 that could be starting potential safety? Because the Jets might have a full clean slate at safety. Chuck Clark's a free agent. Ashton Davis is a free agent. And who knows, maybe Tony Adams is back, but it's a whole new coaching staff, and we don't know how they're going to value him in the system.
Yeah. So it is not a very deep safety class, top to bottom, draftable. The two names that you're going to hear most people talk about are Malachi Starks and Xavier Watts. Malachi Starks out of Georgia, who's kind of in the mold of Javon Holland. You can play a little free safety. You can put him on the nickel, and he can man up against wide receivers and big slots. He's got enough. He can do enough in the perimeter and in the box where certain fits he can play that rover, that hybrid linebacker role. Even though he's only about 6'1", 6'2", 205 pounds. He's got a very strong skill set. He's probably the only guy that's going to go in the first round. I reckon that there may be, one, maybe two that go in rounds 2 or 3. I think this is probably more of a class that's going to get pushed down to day 3. Could you find starters? Yeah, you can find starters at any round in the league. There's a kid out of Penn State who got injured. His name's Kevin Winston. I thought he was a really good player. I wonder how much the injury is going to affect him. But he's a kid that I think can play in the league. Andrew McCuba out of Texas is another true center field type ball hawk and free safety that I think is going to be has a chance to be even better in the pros than he was in college. Am I willing to Am I willing to spend second round capital on those? Probably not, because even if I was to miss out on them, I don't know how big the drop off is to the next couple guys.
Right, I agree with you. I think we see this now in the draft too. Is there's such an emphasis on getting skill positions, wide receivers, tight ends. You see like that run on running backs on day 2. You see quarterbacks, all those offensive positions, especially offensive line on day 2, early day 1, pushes a lot of guys that probably should be talent wise day 2 defenders onto day 3, just because of the emphasis on offense. So I can understand what you're saying with the safety position, but I think you bring up some really good names, and it's a position where I think the Jets have to be smart. I think ideally you probably try to bring in a veteran and try to pair them with a rookie potentially. Maybe this coaching staff values Tony Adams higher than we initially thought. They might not value Tony Adams.
I'll say this about Steve Wilks, and again, I don't know how much this is going to be still Steve Wilks's defense, or if it's going to be still Steve Wilks running Aaron Glenn's defense. But both of them utilize a lot of nuance from the back 4, the back 5, really. The corners, the nickel, and the safeties are vital parts of those offense. They do a lot of, they'll show something pre-snap and swap off into a different look post-snap. They try to confuse the quarterback a lot. Steve Wilks has a tendency to use his safeties a lot as rushers, as that fifth rusher in some of those zone dog blitzes, where they might drop a defensive lineman back into the hook zone and blitz a corner or safety from that side or the opposite side, so on and so forth. So I think it's a position that you're right. Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh in their scheme really didn't prioritize. But you could see a change in that. And I do know, in just speaking with, the people down in Mobile and really, sometimes even, in a bunch of situations, asking the prospects directly, some of them had meetings with the Jets. They met with all the teams. They have kind of this round robin thing where they get 10, 15 minutes with all the teams that are there. But some of them had follow-up visits or met with Phil Savage directly. Some of them had formal interviews lined up. So the safety room is something that the scouts were paying attention to down in Mobile for the Jets. Now, does that mean I think one of these guys that were at the Senior Bowl are going to bump up into the first or the second round? No, I'm not saying that, but the Jets have a 4th rounder, 2 5ths, and 2 6ths, so that could be
Right.
prime real estate for landing some of these guys.
And also maybe going up and getting into late day 3 or early day 3, late day 2 with some of that extra capital. But you brought up a really good point, and I kind of wanted to kind of get to wrapping up on this. So you said that a lot of Jets, the prospects were meeting with Phil Savage.
Mhm.
With this turnover that the Jets are having, obviously certain scouts are going to remain, some new scouts are going to come in. Is there any concern that, with the Jets now getting a new GM this week, getting a new head coach, that maybe they weren't as invested in the Senior Bowl or weren't as prevalent as other years when the staff is established? Is there any worry about maybe miscommunication between the two? And do you feel like Phil Savage is still going to have a major role in this organization, or is he kind of just playing out the string
Yeah, I don't
here
know.
for the
I don't
Jets?
know if he's going to have a major role in this organization moving forward, but he's going to have a major role and really be a key cog for this team through May, through the draft. I mean,
Mhm.
listen, the scouting started years ago, right? The scouting on these guys, they started putting together evals and reports and doing their due diligence and their background checks and doing everything that the life of a scout does well before the Jets chose to move on from Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas. The scouts operate on cyclical on their contracts, and it's usually May to May. So
Mhm.
even though there's no way you can feasibly, fire a head coach and GM in January and fire the entire scouting staff as well and still be able to function for a draft in April. It's just it's an impossibility. So a lot of the stuff that the scouts have put together will stay. A lot of Phil Savage's insights will be utilized. He's going to have a big say in a lot of these guys. Now it's Muji and Aaron Glenn and whoever they bring in the front office. They're going to be the ultimate decision makers. And then after this draft cycle is done, they might then move on from the entire scouting staff and Phil Savage himself at that point. But until this draft is done, these guys like Phil Savage has been, he's been keeping the lights on in One Jets Drive. I mean, he's everywhere. He was at he's been at every single, all-star event since the season ended the regular season ended in, late December. So.
Well, that's why I really love and enjoy talking to you, because you offer this opportunity behind the curtain to really see this. And I guess I feel like a lot of Jet fans would respond to that. Should we be concerned if you have a new coach, you have a new GM, you have a new philosophy, you have a new kind of system that they're trying to build players for? Now, a lot of these scouts this last couple of years, they've been going to the grocery store for Robert Saleh. They knew the ingredients that they were looking for. Now you
Mhm.
have a completely new staff. They're not going to throw out what they've done, the evaluations they've done. They're still going to have those evaluations, but is it a tricky process when you have all of a sudden a whole schematic and change, and also a change in how they're looking to evaluate certain players? Is that something that you worry about for this first draft? Just a slight disconnect, or maybe just miscommunication between the scouts and this new regime, who again aren't all maybe on the same page, but this is also still a very crucial draft, and you never want to miss on any draft picks. But is that always a concern when you have this kind of turnover in an offseason?
I don't know if listen, is it ideal? No. Is it a concern? I'm not sure. To be honest with you, like the evaluation is going to be the evaluation, right?
Okay.
And whether or not like Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas would highlight, parts A, B, and C that the evaluation say, Muji and Aaron Glenn might be more concerned with, you know, F, G, and K, but the evaluation is still the same. The meat and potatoes is there. It's just how they process that information or what they're looking for. Now, you're right in the sense that, if they go ahead and bring in new scouts, they might have a different type of player that they're looking for. Like, there might be the defensive ends that Robert Saleh and the friend Joe Douglas, not Robert Saleh, but Joe Douglas in the front office would really hone in on, might not be the same type of
Mhm.
defensive end that Muji and Aaron Glenn will fit Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes' system. So there could be some change in that, but the meat and potatoes right here is here. How it's processed is really going to be the big litmus test to see if the firing and the hiring is going to be smooth sailing transition, or if it's going to be rocky road. We won't know that for a couple years though.
Yeah, well, the last thing we need is more rocks on the road as Jet fans. We're hoping we pave over that this offseason. But
Yeah.
again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here on Rich Sports Talk. A big shout out to Dom C. Again, guys, amazing in this process. He has a great draft prospect visit list, which tracks all the visits that the Jets have had. That is on his Twitter page.
Yeah, and I'll be updated. I'll be updating that probably tonight with the stuff that I verified at the Senior Bowl itself. So you have some new names on there. Do with that information what you will. I just think it's interesting. I think a lot of people are interested in it. That's why I always put it together.
Can we get a little tease? Is there an interesting name that the Jets visited with that you think is someone to keep an eye on that you're very intrigued by?
There's a bunch of defensive tackles. There's a bunch of safeties. Terrence Ferguson, he's a name that I brought. I know that he met twice. He met in the round robin, and then, he had a further follow-up interview with some scouts. So there's a name.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one. We'll definitely keep an eye on that, guys. So again, guys, pencil in Terrence Ferguson for your Jets bingo card for the draft. You heard it here first. But again, he's Dom C. Hopefully we can have him on before the draft because, again, this is a crazy offseason. There's going to be a lot of great content as we go through it. Again, guys, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our latest content here on Rich Sports Talk. We'll have more breakdowns throughout the offseason with the New York Jets. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And again, Dom, thanks so much for coming on as we break down one of my favorite events of the entire season, the Senior Bowl. Again, thank you for being on the ground in Mobile. And if you guys want to check out some great interviews, go check out this man's Twitter. He has some great interviews with some great prospects. If you really love the insight and see how the sausage is made, he's the guy to follow on Twitter.
I appreciate it, man.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. I'm Nolan Rich, and this is Rich Sports Talk. We will see you next time.